Robert Allen Stanford was born in Texas in 1950. He helped to run the family insurance business, but soon had bigger plans. Borrowing a few $1 million from his father, he established an offshore bank in the tiny island nation of Antigua. Stanford International Bank was where many people put their wealth out of their own country. It operated outside of direct U.S. inspection. The bank issued certificates of deposits that yielded higher returns than most American deposits. By 2007, just 16 years after opening the bank in Antigua, had 30,000 customers in 131 countries, with more than $8 billion in investments. While operating the bank, he made deals with the Antiguan officials, providing them loans, and then they often used the money to hire Stanford's construction companies. Some people complained that the relationship was not completely ethical. He began diverting the depositors' funds into his personal ventures. He purchased an airline, a local newspaper, a residential complex, two restaurants, and a stadium. He ended up owning so many things there, some called it Stanford Land. He soon obtained Antiguan citizenship, and in 2006 he was knighted by the Antiguan government.
Stanford continued to secretly funnel depositor funds from the bank into a web of companies that he owned, using various overseas bank accounts to launder the money. Despite the constant infusion of proceeds, the businesses remained unprofitable, and by 2008, he was using $1 million a day from the bank to keep his failing personal businesses open. He understood that the lifeline for his bank, like any Ponzi scheme, was the continued flow of fresh funds from new depositors. He used these funds to pay returns to initial investors rather than investing the deposits and paying them from the profit earned. He directed members of his CD sales team to increase sales no matter what and awarded generous bonuses and commissions based solely on CD sales. To make sure that only a handful of people knew about the fraud, he engaged in a pattern of intimidation to ensure secrecy in his organization by threatening employees with termination if they told the truth. He instructed employees to hide financial information from the SEC and burned barrels full of financial and personal records. He fabricated the bank's investment returns to make them appear more profitable and employed several accountants to fake the financial numbers for the bank's annual statements. He paid external bank auditors more than $3.4 million to rubber stamp the forged financial statements without doing any actual auditing. He routinely bribed the Antiguan regulators for running interference with bank examiners and SEC officials. In 2008, as the financial crisis hit, redemptions of CDs at the bank sharply increased and new sales flatlined, a deadly combination that caused Stanford's scheme to unravel. His failing businesses generated only losses and consequently were illiquid and could not readily be sold. His personal business was consuming more than $1 million a day, and there was no cash coming in from new CD sales.
The scheme finally unraveled February 17, 2009, when federal agents raided the offices of Stanford Financial. The SEC charged Allen Stanford with massive ongoing fraud, misappropriating billions of dollars of investors' money and falsifying bank records to hide their fraud. His assets, along with those of his companies, were frozen and placed into receivership by a U.S. federal judge, who also ordered him to surrender his passport. The receiver found that Stanford International Bank owed more than $7.2 billion to its investors, but only held assets valued at $500 million. Stanford had refused to provide any court-ordered financial information or to cooperate with recovering any concealed assets. It took 3 years to bring Stanford to trial because while in prison he developed an addiction to prescription anxiety medication and was also severely beaten by another inmate. He claims amnesia and says he couldn't remember anything that happened before the jail fight, including his globe-trotting lifestyle. To the end, Stanford denied he did anything wrong. He blames the federal government and the receiver who took over his companies for tearing down his business empire and preventing his investors from getting any of their money back. In March 2012, he was convicted by a jury of 13 counts of fraud and sentenced to 110 years in prison for cheating investors out of more than $7 billion over 20 years in one of the largest Ponzi schemes in U.S. history. This case is a combination of legal and ethical violations and a case of conflict of moral relativism. First, it was clear that there were many legal violations such as bribery, lying, falsifying financial statements, and obstruction of justice. Wire fraud is willfully devising a scheme to defraud or obtain money based on false representations or promises, using electronic communications or interstate communications facility, and is a federal offense. The situation was also an ethical violation because Stanford's selfish interest and greed caused him to harm others by behaving unethically and immorally in his desire for personal gain.